Thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. I really appreciate it. You can see conspicuously absent is our third panelist, Matt McPhee. In full disclosure, he texted me a couple of days ago and said, my wife has the flu. I'm not feeling that great, just FYI. And I told him just to power through, get some vitamin C, and he'll be fine. And he texted me last night and said, now I'm out, I can't even talk. So he sends his regrets, and we hope a speedy recovery. Well, I'm really excited to have this group together today. Thank you all for braving this fantastic weather, torrential downpour this morning, and making, for some of you, a very long drive from even North Charlotte and coming out. My name is Gary Schwacke. I'm a managing partner at Yield Group Growth Advisory. We are a small but mighty firm of folks who work with companies to help them really take this strategy, their growth strategy, and make it executable by working with marketing and sales technology and the data that underlies it to make it happen. And so as we have been working with clients in and out of Charlotte, we found that there's a lot of discussion around this idea of product market fit, but then as you move beyond that stage, what does that growth process really look like? And it's different for every company, and it's different at every stage. And so both Chris and Andy and Matt were kind enough to provide us their time and share their experiences. And both have a wealth of experience that I think we'll all learn from, so appreciate that. So I'm going to quickly, I'll let them actually introduce themselves because they'll do a much better job of it, but Chris Haligan is a partner and chief operating officer of Payzer, and Andy Horwitz is now retired co-CEO of what was Black Mountain Systems, recently acquired by Vista Equity. So Andy, why don't we start with you?
Gary and I have known each other for almost 20 years, worked together at one of the banks in town, not unlike a lot of people I've seen out here, former corporates and now entrepreneurs. But for the last 13 years, I've spent time in the startup world, and I will never go back to the corporate world. I'm not sure I'll ever go back and want to go through the early years of starting and running a company again. But I would definitely get on board someone who has a great idea and help. So happy to provide advice. For the last 13 years, as I said, I helped found, grow, and exit not once but twice a really great firm. It was intended to be started as a portfolio management, trading, research, compliance solution for professional investment managers. Surprisingly, people who invest money for a living use Excel just like the rest of us to manage money, and there's a better way to do it. So we built a system. I came from the business and had experience and seeing the system, the lack of systems needs out there, and ultimately we delivered on that plan, and it's now a company of 450 people and over 100 million of revenue, and recently valued at just slightly shy of a billion, which was, kind of, I really wanted to get to the unicorn before I left. Didn't quite make it, but it's very close to being on its way.
We'll let you round up.
Okay.
I'm Chris Haligan. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Payzer, which is a software company that caters to home improvement contractors. We're located just a couple miles from here. We've been around for 7 years. We have 5,000 contractors as our customers. We have 100 employees, and we're on the same trajectory that you were talking about. We're not quite at the end of it yet. But prior to that, I've done 7 other startups, and I've had 4 good outcomes, 1 that was okay, and 2 now catastrophes. So you learn a little bit through all that. And we are, Gary and Eric and Andy from Yield Group, they actually are consultants to us, so they help us grow.
Great.
7 is pretty impressive, and 4 out of 7 is even more impressive.
Well, I always tell people it's way better than like baseball or something, right? Because the great thing about playing the startup game is that when you lose, you can only lose 100% of what you put in, and you don't have to lose 100% of what you put in. But when you win, you can make 25,000%. So the wins and the losses don't weigh the same, right? And so like if you look at someone's record in startup land, they can be 1 in 9 and be a billionaire, right? And so like it's an asymmetric game where the odds are in your favor in a way that most games are not. And so what it encourages to me is repeated trials. If you go start something and it's not working and you know it's not going to work and you really have given it everything you can, you should stop, right, and try again, right?
I'm literally looking at someone in the audience. I'll look away now so that they don't. Who I gave that very advice to, who just did that. So I totally agree. And I guess I grew up as a soccer player, and one of my coaches told me that in baseball you got to hit 300 or 400 to be great. In soccer, as a striker, if you hit 1 out of 10, you're a superstar. And so he said, just keep shooting, and that's the same advice.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's a really good segue. So we hear a lot about this product market fit, almost mythology, right? And there's a lot of definitions around it. I think the one that the yield team gravitates to is this idea of that the market actually pulls product from the company. That there's such a groove there that you really have understood your market, and you start to see those things align and pull together. But for every company, it's different, and I think also there's times when you feel like you have it, and then you really don't as you start to lean into that. So if you kind of go back to your experiences earlier on, and let's start with Chris, because you're kind of, as you move to each stage, you're kind of in a new phase of product market fit as you start to expand markets and what have you. But looking back to probably the earlier days of Payzer when you felt like, hey, we've got something here. And you have almost two phases. You have the payments piece, and now you've got the software piece, where the data points that came together to help the team realize, hey, I think we're onto something here that's repeatable. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so the founding story of Payzer is a little bit like the founding story of Jackrabbit, which Mark runs, which is a really successful SaaS company based in Davidson or Huntersville? Huntersville, yeah. But it was founded in the bonus room of a guy's house. And they did a couple years before I got there, right? But for me, the time that I knew we had something was we went to a regional distributors trade show for HVAC contractors, right? And the HVAC contractors of America I'm here to tell you, they're great people, and they're not trying to screw you no matter what you think. they're by and large an ethical and kind lot, and all they want to do is fix your stuff and get paid and go on to the next one. We gave a brief talk to a group of about 250 contractors, and then we all had the little sort of conventional table where people could walk up, and about 50 of them came over to us. We were like, everybody wanted to talk to us, and that was just blindingly obvious to me that the fundamental things that we were communicating to them address pain points for our customers. And I would like it if I felt like the market was sort of pulling product from us. I mean, like that would be great, Zach, work harder. But what I saw was the way that I felt like we had product market fit when it was apparent to me that they needed what we were making, right? They didn't want what we were making, they needed it. And there's a huge difference between need and want, right? And I could just tell there were guys who would come up to me, and like one of the fundamental value propositions of our product at that time was, we will help you collect money from the homeowners who won't pay you. They have a dim view of you. They do. Lots of you don't pay them. It's tough. Pay them. Pay the guy. But they knew that our product could help them get paid. And they're like, what does it cost? Let me sign up. Let's do this now. And that I knew at that point, it was like, okay, all we need now is just have scalable processes so we can grow this and get it out to more people.
Yeah. Andy, how about you?
I had a very similar experience, obviously very different industry, but there was a complete lack of solutions out there for professional money managers. And I guess one of my partners had the idea. I think you always need the idea. You need someone who can actually build the solution, and then you need someone who can actually sell the said solution. And so the three of us were excellent in our backgrounds and perspectives, operations, IT, and someone who'd worked in the industry. And so I had a lot of friends who were in the industry, and I just assumed that I worked at a dysfunctional organization and we just hadn't figured out how to solve it. But what I realized was that nobody had figured out how to solve it. And I walked into one of the largest asset managers in the world and talked to the CEO, who said, once a month, 5 days after month end, I get a report on my desk that's, X number of pages and this thick, and I can see exactly what I owned 5 days ago. And that's how I manage my portfolios. And so then for the rest of the month, you work from 5 days behind to 35 days behind, and until the next month you get your report. And it was mind-blowing to me that it wasn't just my organization that had no solutions, but it was, and so in that first tour, I introduced my two partners to, I think, 9 firms here in Charlotte. One of my partners lived in San Diego. He was the tech guy, and that's where we were headquartered. The guy with the idea had lived in Boston, and he had worked at Bain, and he had discovered the need for this while he was there because he was trying to solve this. So you had people who worked at, my partner had sold a prior business to JP Morgan. We had a guy at Bain, myself at one of the banks, and these large organizations couldn't solve their very real problems. And so I thought we had a good idea, but as you sit across the room, just like you say, 50 people show up at your booth. Well, when their eyes pop when they see it, and you just know that you've got something great. Now, despite this guy's eyes popping, and that was in December of 2007, he did not buy it until September of 2011. So you would think that you've got the most wonderful thing. And oh, by the way, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a tiny little financial crisis between 7 and 11. So we'll talk later about things you might want to do as you're starting a business and overfunding and making sure you can live to survive, to see the other side where you ultimately believe there is this product market fit, and there truly was, but it takes longer than you ever think.
Well, and that's one of the really challenging things is that you'll have one of these really validating experiences like yours or mine, where you know that people want what you're making, they need what you're making, and then you have to get them to do it, right? And that's like you sort of struggle to climb this mountain of making something that people just give a crap about. And once you get to that point, then it's like, how do you find them all, right? And how do you get them to actually sign up, actually use it, actually give you money, actually stick around, all that stuff. And it is an entirely, it's like a whole nother startup experience.
Right.
Right? Is that what you had?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great segue, because we'll talk a little bit about this quote from the Startup Genome Project.
Hey, Gary, I want to tell you, like, as a segue, I have seen the question, so I know I'm like just
Well,
feeding you.
I know, I'm saying, but
I'm actually just collaborating.
let's
kind of a
This is not
plant.
improv.
Let's pretend
it's
for a
totally
moment
scripted.
that this
Right.
is new information to you.
How
and I'm
come I
just
never
pulling
saw the
this out of the
questions?
sky in pure wisdom. Haligan, good Lord. Startups need 2 to 3 times longer to validate their market than most founders expect. This underestimation creates the pressure to scale prematurely. In our data set, we found that 70% of startups scaled prematurely along some dimension. While this number seemed high, this may go a long way towards explaining the 90% failure rate of startups. And so you both mentioned something, it's that aha moment where you've identified the product market fit moment of, we have identified a problem that is urgent and pervasive and needs solving, and people are very interested in having it solved. And now we have to build an economic model and use model around actually making a business out of that. And this whole idea of, then you start to marry those two together, and you move into that next phase where you can have some false positives, right? Either you get your pricing wrong, or you go to market wrong, or you pick your segments wrong, or it's a really small segment and not big enough. Talk a little bit about that stage where you're past that moment where, yes, we know we're onto this thing, we have a solution for this problem, and now we're starting to build people, processes, and teams and tech around actually going to market. What did that look like for you, Andy?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think we scaled too soon. If anything, we scaled too late. We were scared of
Was
running
this
out.
pre-08 or
Well,
post-08?
I would say we were scared of running out of money because by the time even if we knew in December of 2007 that we had a product market fit, we raised a round in 2007 and then we raised a following round in 2008. But the entirety of those 2 rounds was $3 million, so it was not a lot of capital, and so we really had to live within our means. I think that's where me being a former banker actually came back to help us, because we really sized the market and our firm to ensure survival. I had been through kind of non-fully funded business plans where great businesses went out of business because they didn't have capital and the capital markets backed up. And I didn't want to have that happen to us. So we didn't invest in anything, people, processes, systems. Systems, yes, because that's ultimately what we were. But I would argue that our first 10 clients, even though we're now a fully, kind of cloud-based SaaS product, we were effectively building custom solutions for those first 10 to 12 clients, looking for the feedback to understand what common denominators were across all of those clients before. So we didn't invest in any of the things we needed to invest in or should have invested in until it was almost too late, right? When September of 11 rolled around and we finally did sign that client who had the epiphany the very first day he saw it, we were still only 5 years in. We were 24 employees. And within 6 weeks of signing that client, we were 40 employees. So you would think that that's an investment in people. But I would argue we should have been 40 a couple of years before, and we played catch up for almost the entirety of our existence until probably the last 12 months when we finally, and I guess when we crossed 100, it took us 11 years to cross 100, and then it took us 2 years to go from 11 to 500. So we didn't invest early enough. And I would argue the lesson is make sure you're funded appropriately and double the time, double the capital, and then invest in the people and the process and the systems. And I know this is not supposed to be an advertisement for Gary and his team, but
We'll take it.
They can help you with some of that process.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the question a little bit. Is one of the things, like on a semi-regular basis, I'll meet with people who have startups here in town, and one of the worst conditions that I observe sometimes for early stage companies is a really great founder who's in a really great market, who doesn't have product market fit, and they're really trying hard to scale. Because they're just on the road to death because their thing, it's just not going to work. And they're so committed to the story that they're telling out in the world about how they're going to grow and how the numbers are going to get better and all that. And so they're trying to sell something that doesn't work, right? And they get just emotionally, mentally, psychologically committed to that concept, and they're just on the road to death, right?
Yeah, and you have to sell from day one. You can't go build this perfect product and this perfect company, and you've got this amazing vision. When you sell, people will tell you with their wallets what they're willing to pay for and what they're not willing to pay for. And if they're not willing to pay for it, it doesn't matter how great you think it is. It doesn't mean you can't pivot, but when you start selling, you can pivot and you can truly understand. And you may have been in their shoes and think you know, but maybe you didn't have the budget to go spend it when you were in that role. And when you pitch to someone who has that budget, if they are not buying, there's something wrong with the vision, and you have to pivot.
Yeah, and it's you shouldn't push the accelerator until you're sure you're on the freeway, right? And then the minute you're on the freeway, then you have to hammer it, right?
Absolutely.
And give yourself all the resources that you need, and then you go for all the things you have to do to scale, all the things that you have to do to help other people come on board and take the ball and run with it and all that. And it's a really delicate thing.
You're totally right.
Because if you hammer the accelerator and you're on Park Road and it's 5 p.m., you're not going anywhere. You're not.
Nowhere good.
You're not going to, right? But once you hit 485 at 10 in the morning and it's clear sailing, go do it, right?
Yeah, and I got some really bad advice from a really smart guy who had been very successful, had run a business at B of A, ran a business, moved to Carlisle and ran a business, became one of our seed investors. And I asked him a question at that point where we had product market fit, and I knew we did. It had been proven. We needed to scale, and I said, what should I focus on, revenue growth or EBITDA? And I had always focused on EBITDA, meaning I wanted to make sure I could cover my cash and I didn't have to go raise additional capital. But what I got the advice from him was you can't be able to just walk or chew gum. You need to be able to do them both at the same time. And looking back, that was bad advice. I should have focused entirely on revenue growth, and EBITDA be damned. As long as I was neutral, cover the cash flow needs. Don't ever put yourself in the situation where you're going to go out of business, but just go, because we were growing, incredibly fast. I mean, the early years, 100% plus a year. in the later years, even now, we're still, in the 30s. So it's great growth, but it could have been even faster. We could have stifled early competition even quicker. And it was, and he's a super smart guy. I'm still friends with him. I'm going skiing with him in a couple weeks, so I've forgiven him. But it was bad advice.
Well, and like one of the things that I always tell people is, like, I think people who have been successful in corporate America and people who have been successful in early stage America they're different, right? And the analogy I always use to help communicate that is this, right? Can everybody think of LeBron James? Can you imagine LeBron James? Yeah? World class, elite athlete, exceptional person, LeBron James, right? Okay. And then can everybody imagine Michael Phelps, right? World class athlete, incredible, off the charts, right? Isn't it easy for you to imagine Michael Phelps sucking at basketball, right? Isn't it easy for you to imagine LeBron James not being a great swimmer, right? When you go ask corporate people what you should do in your startup, dude, you're asking LeBron James about swimming. He doesn't know. He's super successful. He's got a ton of confidence. He's going to tell you what he believes. He's going to be persuasive because he's done a great job of what he's doing, and he didn't know anything, right? And vice versa, right? I mean,
you're totally, yeah.
Well, if corporate America was, pro ball and startups were A ball, all successful startup people would be former corporate people who have moved down. And none of them are. All of them aren't, right? They're entirely different things. And so when you're kind of going through this process, you have to find humans who have gone on the same journey as you and talk to them, right? Because they're the ones who can actually give you relevant advice. And, I like your friend too. And like, he was totally well-intentioned when he gave you that advice.
Absolutely.
And it's 100% true in his world.
That's right.
But not ours.
Yeah, and that's why now, even today, he and others like him that are still seeding, venture stage companies are constantly asking me to be involved, and they're deferring to me to give these founders advice and guidance. And I'm laughing because I'm like, well, wait, I took advice from you guys, and it all worked. It did work out,
Right.
but I think it would have worked out even better. And I will say I didn't have a board. Actually, I did. I had two founders on my board outside of the seed guys who were excellent, and I probably listened to the money guys more than I should have because that was the industry I had come from. But now, at looking back, I absolutely agree. Right? You don't ask Michael Phelps for basketball advice.
Right. But he'll give it.
Yeah, well, and you know what? And you'll take it because he's successful.
He's Michael Phelps.
And
He's like,
and
he's
you've
gotta
seen
do
him
something.
succeed, and you've seen him succeed at something, so you think he can do lots of things. Yeah, totally. And he's a lead athlete, so you might say, oh well, that works. I love it.
But I do think like there's this inherent tension in building one of these things where there's all this fear and anxiety at the beginning, like how am I ever going to get this thing to like have any traction at all and all that, and you want to conserve capital and be manage things, right? And then as soon as you're in the clear, then you have to punch it, and you have to switch psychologically, and you need capital to do it.
Yeah.
You have to switch psychologically like overnight.
And I'm not going to disagree with you because I 100% agree with you. But I'll just say, if you get a little more capital early on,
Hell yeah.
you're in a better place where you're not feeling, and you're always going to feel the highs and lows. The roller coaster is so extreme. Even once you know that there's product market fit, the highs and lows of the wins and losses are so much more extreme than you can possibly describe to anyone who hasn't lived it themselves. And see a lot of heads shaking out there, and I know you guys know that. Nobody in the corporate world can possibly understand how great you feel or how shitty you feel on a daily basis.
So last January 8th, which was 28 days ago or so, I went to dinner with my wife, and she goes, "What's wrong?" And I said, "We're completely screwed at Payzer." Right? I mean, I was like, "We're utterly and totally screwed, and I don't know what to do about it." And January was a record sales month for us, right? So, like the highs and lows come.
I tried to quit in August of 2011.
Totally.
About a month before we sold the deal
Right.
that ultimately turned it. We literally sold 3 deals from the time I tried to quit till September. After 12 deals in 4 years. So it totally changed, and I was at the as low gets. I remember talking to my partner and saying, "Listen, this has been great. This has been the most fun I've ever had,
Right,
not
this has
making
been
money." You know,
But I need to get a
but
job.
at some point, I need to have an income, health care, all these little things that you might.
So when you guys started to grow, right, what did you do to grow? What was your playbook, Andy?
Oh, for us, we hired. We hired exceptional people. We already had the product developed at that point. But for us, it was we had not hired a single salesperson other than me for 5 years. We professionalized and turned our go-to-market into a process as opposed to a person. We invested in our product team, not our technology team that built the technology, but our product team that took those common denominators across all of our client implementations into a true cloud product. And then eventually we got to process. We were a little slow to get to process, but after our first failed attempt at selling, we realized that maybe we needed some process as well.
Chris,
It's
how
really
about you?
similar for us. We started to add people, and the key was hire great people and breed an ownership mentality in them.
Yep.
They're not going to care as much as you, but you have to try and motivate them, hire for it, and motivate them and train them and educate them to care.
Curious to know what percentage of your employee base owns equity?
100%.
100%. Okay, so that's interesting. We went into it thinking that was the right answer for us, and we ultimately concluded after many years of, and we didn't do it on a percentage. It was which person deserves equity. And again, how many people are you now?
100.
100. That's amazing because we definitely found that there was not 100% of the people that either valued equity, cared about equity, or deserved equity. But it was a much higher percentage for us than I think most firms. I will say, having gone through it a couple of times, we found that somewhere between 25 and 33% was the right percentage for us, not because we were targeting a percentage, but because we were targeting the right people. When we got to Vista, when it came to, part of to allocate equity in this most recent deal, they were flabbergasted at how high our percentage was. They never had a portfolio company with that high. They wanted to concentrate it in 10 to 12, not percent, but 10 to 12 people in an organization that was now 450 plus. I fundamentally disagreed with that. We fought that and ultimately won to some extent, but not to the extent that I would have liked. And so I genuinely believe hiring great people, making sure they have an equity mentality before you grant the equity, because we did some early grants that probably were overly generous and people that weren't ultimately the largest contributors. So we did want people to prove it, earn it, and demonstrate it before you could always start with sprinkling a little, and I found that a little goes a long way. The amount wasn't as important as the fact that they had equity. And,
That's right.
And then you can allocate the right amount once you've seen the contribution and the performance and that ownership mentality. And the people who have those ownership mentalities are crucial. We had, by the time we sold to Vista, we had, I think, let's call it 25% of our company. The people that had equity when we sold to Stone Point the first time around, we didn't lose a single one in the 5 years between Stone Point and Vista. So these people cashed out once and not a single one left. And it was not because they couldn't have. It was because they loved what they did. We built a culture they wanted to be a part of, and we had a purpose that they wanted to contribute to. And so finding those people with ownership mentality, the people, process, product, but it's always the people.
So with that, take that, your analogy, Chris, of pulling onto the freeway, and I imagine in some cases in a startup we feel like it's a 1989 Pinto or something, and you got to hammer it and get it going, and you start to put a good group of people around that. And then what are the points where you start to realize maybe the people get ahead, or the ability to repeat that process as you're bringing new people in, particularly as you think about as you're adding people in that process, probably more so in your case, Chris, where you wake up 12 months later and half of your company is brand new. Then you wake up another 12 months and another, it's reforming itself as you grow. What are some of the things that you put in place to help make those positions repeatable, or how did you build those as you went? And then what were the kind of the processes and systems around that so that you could point people in the right direction?
I can't wait to hear the answer because I hadn't figured it out.
So my principal job today, and we're growing, this is our 5th year of growing at, north of 50%. We'll grow way north of 50% this year, probably close to 100. My principal job is to make my teammates' jobs as simple and clear as it can be. That is my job. And that if there is a person in our company who does not understand what they are supposed to be doing, it's my fault, right? And making a job simple for someone else is really difficult. Like, it is really, really difficult, right? And so you have to, it helps if you have done it, right? Literally done the job that they're doing, right? And you have to be as prescriptive as is required while leaving room for them to go express themselves and be excellent, right? And that's a really interesting balance, right? But that means you have to thoughtfully contemplate all the aspects of what you're asking your people to do at every step, right? So that when they come in, they can be relatively unclouded by complexity, ambiguity, difficulty, and their job is to come in and be awesome and do their thing. And that's, Zach, our marketing director, is here. That's what we do. And I'd give us sort of a B or a B minus, right? Something like that, right? There are oceans of opportunity of improvement for us, right? But we hire, 23-year-old people who haven't had a meaningful job ever in their, career. And a couple months later, they're signing up 4 or 5 software as a service customers every month, and the customers are happy and they know what they're doing, and they have this confidence and they can do it. Right? And they're like, they ride on an airplane to go do it. That's exciting for them, in a lot of cases. But that's the fundamental thing is you have to understand what you're asking your people to do so well that you can make it simple for them so that they can excel at it, I think.
Yep. Andy?
I'm not even
How did I do? How did I do?
You
Andy?
did great.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
no.
good.
If we got a D, I'd be happy. So B minus sounds really good. Yeah, I have nothing to add there.
Yeah.
I would actually love for you to come be our COO or CEO. If you can do that and get our firm to a B minus, that would actually.
And you have, the thing that's interesting about it is, as you grow, we had 2 years ago we had 30 people. Now we have 100. So we went 30, 60, 100, and those are entirely different things, right? And so the nature of my job, everything that Zach does now, I used to do. Now I do none of it, right? And he does, 90% other things that I never did. And so as a leader in this organization.
And better than you did.
Probably, yeah.
Right. No, I say that because I've got a general
Zach
counsel
in
here.
specific maybe. I don't know.
Right, okay.
Right.
Well, I have a general counsel sitting here who, same thing. I used to negotiate all the contracts. And for, how long you been here, Jason? 2 years. There we go. So for 11 years, we didn't have a lawyer negotiating our contracts, and that was me. That was my job. I've never been to law school, so I would hope that he could do it better than I ever did. But that's the, you're right. You as a founder, you did everything. You were as they say, kind of a master of none. But you did everything, and now you have to put in place the right people and the right process to allow an organization to get better. It took us, getting over 100. I think 100's a big. I don't know how many businesses you've been involved where they've gone under to over. I do think that's about the
huge deal.
point where when you stop knowing, well, when you start walking into the office and seeing people around that you don't actually recognize, that you don't know by name, that you don't know their spouse or their kids or their college or their interests, and that was a bad point for me, and a point where I kind of realized maybe this isn't what I want to be doing. I'd rather kind of go back and know everybody and know everything. But I do think it changes, and that's where the process that you're talking about is critical.
Well, and the other thing you got to do, one of the things we're pretty good at, the two founders of the company, Joe and Doug, who I'm partners with, we're really good at fantasizing about the future problems that could derail us. Right? We're great at that. We're great at getting into a room and saying, this could totally kill us in the future, right? Which is a great way to plan, right? Because if you can just make those things not happen, well, then lots of good things can happen to you. And you have to be able to like sort of execute today while really thinking about what do we need to do 6 months from now, a year from now, and 2 years from now, right? And so there's this weird sort of, it's not cognitive dissonance, it's some sort of temporal dissonance where you appear to be in front of someone doing something today, and you're totally not. You're thinking about what's like out in the future that is going to be a problem around the corner, you know?
And that's where you talked earlier about networking and talking to founders and managers, because every one of those coffees, lunches, drinks that you're having with people that are in your shoes are enlightening you around challenges they're facing that you either have faced and can help them solve, or inevitably will face and they're helping you solve. And that's I've loved that aspect of this, is the people, the variety of people I've met, all of whom have something to educate me on, and hopefully I have likewise the same, because I'm not sure that you can sit in an ivory tower and just prescribe everything that will happen or will be, but when you hear about other people's challenges, the light bulb does often go off.
Yeah, you mentioned something, Chris, that from a planning perspective, and even as we're laying out growth plans, thinking about the inversion. Like, what are the things that are going to prevent us from being successful, and actually seeking to address those? It's actually much easier to see those stumbling blocks than it is the path forward, because there's so much unknown.
So does everybody know who Charlie Munger is, Warren Buffett's partner? He has this hilarious joke he tells where he says, if I could know anything about the future, all I'd want to know is where am I going to die? Like, where am I going to die?
And then I go there.
Andy stepped on my... Andy, way to go, Andy.
I love it. I'm a huge Buffett fan.
Andy is a lot of fun at parties. Have him come.
I love it. I'm a huge Buffett fan. So I heard Buffett, he was on the board of Emory, where I went to college, and he spoke to my finance class back in the day, and I didn't realize what a big deal it was, but I followed him, so I know that joke, and I don't know if he's funny, but Charlie's funny.
Charlie's funny. That's what I'm talking about. Charlie's funny. If you haven't read, like, just for fun, if you want something great to read, Charlie Munger has this essay called The 23 Sources of Human Misjudgment. Holy shit, you should read it. It's great. It's fantastic. Because it talks about all the cognitive biases that we have that cause us to make bad choices.
Yep.
Right? Because I've done several of them today.
So let's talk about, and speaking of growth, I think it's easy as we think about the concept of growth to immediately go to sales, right? It's all about, we need more customers. And the obviously the construct of growth is the entire revenue cycle. So there's the acquisition of new customers, which can come from marketing or can come from direct sales relationships, depending upon your business model, or product, honestly, from freemium models and things like that. And then there's the activation period, where we convert them from kicking the tires to actually becoming customers. And then there's the ability to expand. And this is where your business model, your product model starts to come into play, where you start thinking not just about selling your widget now, but now that I have the customer, how can I expand those? And then you take just the pure velocity of moving things through that cycle. All of those come together to form growth. And in some cases, you'd love to be able to do them all. But as you've progressed through each of your businesses, what have you found, and you lean into those where, I know, Chris, obviously we're working on a lot of those things right now. So as you think about setting those priorities, and it probably gets a little bit easier as your team gets bigger, and you can have, to your point about clarity, this is your singular focus, this is what we're trying to accomplish. Talk a little bit about helping the team understand and define those so that those blocks start to fit together and compound to deliver growth.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say you don't get growth if you have churn. So the first thing you got to go do is ensure that you don't churn, because in order to sell your customers more products, more solutions, and grow, you can't be taking a step backwards. So I think if you're not focusing on churn, if your business is churning, it could have something to do with your product, and you need to figure that out. If you aren't churning and you're having engaged dialogue with clients, I think you inevitably will get just what you said, which is if you solve a problem for someone, they come up with more problems that they want you to solve. So be their trusted partner, solve their problems, ensure that the solution is working not just okay, but exceptionally well. Zero churn should be the goal, and that's my honest assessment. And we went, I think, 8 years before we churned a single client that hadn't gone out of business. There was a couple of clients that went out of business. I call that acceptable churn. You can start to try and pick your clients that you think are going to be around and long-term survivors, but ultimately, if they have their own problems, that's beyond your control, sort of. But once you solve for churn, you've created happy clients, satisfied clients who want to come to you with their problems. You're their therapist, and you solve this problem. Let's go to the next. And so I'd say that's the easiest path towards growth from my perspective.
I totally agree with that. A leaky bucket sucks, and I sort of think there's I sort of think of it as gears that mesh with each other. And there's one, which is sort of the customer satisfaction thing, which is, lack of churn, right? You got to make sure that that's working. And then there's sort of a sales gear behind that, which is how can humans go out and sell our thing, right? And then there's a gear behind that, which is marketing, which is how can we make people who want to buy contact our salespeople? Because my first job was at Dell. And we did something really brilliant, which is we mailed millions and millions of catalogs out every month, right? And we answered the phone when people called us, right? And it worked great. It really worked great. And the people who got the catalogs and never called us, we didn't lose any sleep about it at all. It was fine. We mailed them another catalog. And eventually they called us. And that approach really works great, because if you can have a low churn mechanism where you've got salespeople who can sell it competently, and then you've got a marketing engine that just can deliver prospects to those salespeople. Just apply money and let it grow. And we're sort of in the middle of that. We're sort of, all of our processes are, I think most people would view them as good, and we view them as hopelessly broken and a million times better than they were last year, right? And so we're in the process of perfecting all that stuff so that we can really crank it.
Yeah. And you both have very different business models in that yours is a large, Black Mountain, very large enterprise, right? Long, a 4-year sales cycle, probably extreme, but really long.
We closed one that was 11 years recently. So
there you go.
Yeah.
That's not something. That's a business you want to try to avoid. 11-year sales cycles.
I would argue that if it becomes a 20-year client, it was a good 11-year investment.
Fair enough.
Agreed.
And then small to medium-sized businesses. So how they buy, how they absorb information, the complexity of the buying team, things like that, they're all different. How, over the course of the last several years, have you seen the journey of the buyer change, given the transparency of information available to them? That ultimately what a client wants to do, your customer wants to do, is look through all of your process and see themselves on the other side of buying that product. They want to see your customers as customer success. That's ultimately what they want to get past all the clutter, all the noise, and what's this going to look like for me? And the ability to do that is more and more transparent as they can go to review sites, your own website. In some cases, they can try your product before they buy it. How have you seen that change over the last, we see it accelerating, and then how has your team kind of adapted to that?
So I'd say there's two aspects to it. One is, I think, probably the growth of our organization and our reputation, and then the other is the change in the consumer and how they want to make these decisions. So I think early on, when you think about sales, right, there's I think of it as 4 different distinct sales, or so if you got a $1 product, it needs to go viral, and you can't spend any money on marketing. If you got a $100 product, you can spend some money on marketing, and it's great. If you got a 5 or 6 figure product, you probably have a sales team, and if you have a 7 or 8 figure product, you need CEO, strategic kind of sales. And so that's how I bucket the sales and marketing world. So we started with CEO sales, but we took too long to go from CEO sales to sales, because it didn't need me selling to the CEO of every single company after we had established a pattern of success and a product and a repeatable process. And that's where I think you're describing is this world where now the consumer is not being educated by me. The consumer, or as I think you described, right, they send the catalog out and they call the salesperson. That's what we had to establish, and that's what we had to do. And I think the customers want that. They don't want to hear from a salesperson pitching them something. They want to hear from their peer in the industry that they've got something that worked for them. They want to do their own research, and the internet allows them to do that. And they want to come to you and say, I need, part 3, part 7, and part 12 of that person's solution. And can you bring me a tailored presentation that addresses these 3 things for our organization? And that is phenomenal, because now it doesn't have to be one person selling to one person. It can be thousands of people talking about the solution, educating themselves, educating each other, coming to you with a very specific request that you can then, you should be able to nail that when you go in for the pitch.
Yep.
Marketing drives consideration. I mean, that's what happens.
Right.
And salespeople close deals.
Right.
Raise your hand if you like being cold called. Right? And so and there's a room full of people today sitting down to make 100 cold calls each. We're probably one in this building.
Yeah.
By the way, that doesn't mean you shouldn't make cold calls, because, particularly in the early days, when you're trying to get your product and you're trying to, I want to caution you, just because nobody wants to receive them doesn't mean you can't make them.
Yeah.
You shouldn't. You should.
Yeah, I think super early it's a great way to figure stuff out. I think it's a really hard way to make a living.
It can't continue in perpetuity, but while you're searching for product market fit, you have to be doing that. And that's where I go back to, you have to sell to understand what that need in the marketplace is.
Well, and I think that what we have found in that is that it's not about any one channel. It's we call, then we market, then we whatever. It's the combination of those touch points that bring the customer along, and to your point, make them aware of the ability that they can find those opportunities, that there are peers like them using your product, that they can find information that's specific to them efficiently. And that's the purpose. A call has a spot in an overall strategy. It's not the strategy.
For sure. And so while you start there, you can't end there. You can't. It's not a repeatable. You can't do it forever. You'll never scale. You'll never get to the size and the growth that you want to get to. But it's got to be a starting point, and then you want to, as quickly as humanly possible, move down, from CEO to regular sales to marketing to, if you can go viral, great. I should probably have caveated, I'm a B2B guy, so I don't understand B2C sales. So take any of these words with that caveat.
So just a couple minutes left, and we talked a little bit about, we got together earlier this week, and you guys hit on it here a little bit as well, is this idea of thinking about 2 things. One is the capitalization. Like, at what point do you think it's always taking longer, it's always taking more money, and as you think about that stage where, okay, well, we're going to lean in, and sounds like with the benefit of hindsight, we would have raised some additional capital sooner, right? And it's because you get so wrapped up in this spot of we're going to just peel back the spend so that we can preserve versus, hey, we really have to lean into this, right? We're onto something and it's time to really push on the accelerator and go. And then at the same time, being cognizant of the fact that you're spending that capital efficiently, right? You're actually really thoughtful about the lifetime value of your customer. You have enough data that tells you that. You know your customer acquisition costs. And so at that point, you can confidently lean in because you know the machine is delivering economic value. With the benefit of hindsight, what would you have done a little bit differently? And do you feel like when you raise that capital that you know that equation, or that it's just constantly evolving?
Well, I said it earlier, if raise more than you think you need, if you think you got a 12 or 24 month window, it's going to take twice that, raise twice the amount of money. The dilution that we were worried about early on, and we shouldn't have been, we thought we could be a $40 million enterprise organization. And so when we thought about raising capital, we were like, well, I don't want to give up a bigger percentage of that ultimate end goal. We didn't have the foresight to believe that we could be a $1 billion enterprise. And if we had, we'd have raised more capital earlier and we'd have gotten there faster, and we wouldn't be approaching a unicorn, but we'd be a multi-billion-dollar organization. And I genuinely believe if you have the opportunity in good markets, and by the way, this is still a great capital raising market, but we're now 9 or 10 years into an expansion, so who knows where we'll be 12 or 24 or 36 months from now. So if you have if you need capital, or you even have the slimmest doubt that you need capital, go raise it now, and you'll be happy. And people generally don't regret raising more capital than they need. They always regret not raising enough.
I played tennis. I'm not very good, but
You told me you were 3.5.
I am. That's not very good. And they say this thing, which is if you're on a tennis court and you think, man, I might be a little dehydrated, what that means is you're horrendously dehydrated and you're in deep shit, right? Right? It means you need to take a bath immediately, right? And that's sort of the way it is with raising capital for a company. If you ever think, I wonder if we have enough capital, that means that you're like months and months behind in needing capital, right? And people overassign concern to dilution. They do. I mean, it's a reasonable thing. It's your baby and all that sort of deal. But they wildly overassign to dilution because, like, there are lots and lots of people who avoided dilution and their companies are dead, right? And so they own 100% of nothing. And most of the people that you've met who have done really well financially on a startup, at the end, they didn't own very much of it, right? But the numerator was so big that, it just didn't matter. And so that's how most of these success stories go. But yeah,
Yep.
That's what I think too.
So any burning questions out here? That topics we covered, things you want to go deeper on? Don't be bashful. Cindy.
Yeah, I would like to know when you said in B2B, both of you said marketing drives consideration. What were the top investments you made in B2B marketing to drive consideration you would do again? And what are the ones that you said I invested in and that was a bust?
So we were in a board meeting not too long ago, and we've done a ton of experiments in digital the last couple of years, right? And one of our board members, who's just like really experienced and smart, he said that digital advertising stuff, Google AdWords, all that stuff, just never is the solution. Like, it never is. It can help, and it can help drive things along, right? But the best leads that we have cost us nothing, right? I think it's kind of obvious if you think about it. You can't buy your way to winning, because if you could, all the winners would be the ones with the most money in the first place, right? That's just how you'd win. And so what I would encourage you to do, at least what our experience has been, is find a source of zero cost or near zero cost, high quality leads, and email them. Mail out catalogs and talk to the people who answer you, right? I mean, Zach, right? That's what's working for us. What would you say?
I would just add that your website is priority number one. People want to consume that information before they ever talk to you. having client testimonials on that website. I did a couple of interviews with customers, and we, tried to make it look natural, and and then some of those little whiteboards where they draw things. I found those, they dumb it down, they keep it brief, succinct, they get to the points, you hit your high points, and they're consuming that, and they envision themselves in the situation of the client who's giving the testimonial, or those little whiteboard drawings, and it's all there on your website. It doesn't cost that much. As you said, it's not about running an ad in XYZ. We did do a lot of industry conferences, and so we spoke on panels at a lot of industry conferences.
And that's like a zero cost lead. Like, I mean, you had to fly out there and all that stuff.
Well, I don't know about you, but we had to pay to sponsor those conferences. Maybe it's zero cost. I wasn't doing it right because we were spending a lot more. But
see me after.
All right.
He's got all the tricks. Yeah, I think you pointed out early, Andy, this idea that once you create that relationship with your customer, they're coming you with the problems to solve, and I think that's a big part of it, is really understanding the problems as they define them, and not what it is you're trying to sell them. And speak to that. How do you define the problem? How are you going to search for solutions? How do I help you navigate now in your own way how you want to absorb and consume that information? And then being smart about then when you lean in with sales to really accelerate that process, or really continue to enable the buyer through their journey. That is a big switch that we're trying to help with a lot of our clients, is think less about your product and what you want to say, and more about what they want to hear from you in terms of how they define the problem. Do you have a question?
Yeah. On the sales side, Andy, you talked about hiring exceptional salespeople. And Chris, you talked about sales closes deals. So what did you find worked well and what didn't work, maybe? Acquiring salespeople and then getting them up to productivity.
I'll say one thing we did when we acquired them is we always acquired them 2 at a time, so that we could evaluate them against one another. And we oftentimes hired 2 different types of people, one who was very much about industry experience and one who was very much about sales experience. And we experimented to see which worked. And I think in different organizations, it works differently. So that was our approach. As far as getting them up to speed quickly, when you got a 4 to 11 year sales cycle, it took it honestly, we expected to carry them for 18 to 24 months before they were profitable to us. But we were making an investment in very rarely did we pull the plug before that 24-month period. And most of our people ultimately became very successful. But that was our approach.
So I've had a weird kind of career in some regards. I've hired about 500 salespeople in my life, right? And at Dell, for a little while, at the company, we hired 100 people a week for 4 years, right? So just think it's a lot, right? In Austin. It's like if you were in Austin, you had applied at Dell. There's no doubt about it. Huh. And I've kind of boiled it down over the years to something really, really simple, right? First and foremost, and the thing that I will not trade off on at any level is this person a good human, right? And what I mean by that is, are they nice? Are they kind? Are they ethical? Do they seem like someone you'd want to sit next to on an airplane? Is this a decent human, right? Because I think that if they're not a decent human, they're going to churn, right? And if you really want to drive cost into your business, have churn in the sales organization. That'll screw you up really fast, right? Second, are they smart, right? They don't have to be geniuses, right? But are they bright enough that they can learn something, right? And number 3, do they lie, right? And so I ask lots of questions in our interviews that I know for sure they don't know the answer to. And all I'm looking for is, do they make up answers, right? Because if they make up answers in the interview, guess what they're going to do with the customer when they're out in the world? They're going to make shit up. That's what they're going to do, right? And if they're a good human who is smart, right, and they don't lie, okay, now we're talking. And now I want to know some things like, can I afford you? Can you meet the requirements of this job? Like, it has a lot of travel, right? Can you make it to our offices here? That kind of stuff, right? When can you start? That kind of thing. And then we train the crap out of them. And we train them by telling them what to do and what not to do. And then we make them an apprentice for a little while. And our people are productive in their 10th week, and they're fully productive in their 20th week. Something like that, don't you think? Yeah. But that's my thing. Like, I don't care if they've sold before. I don't care if they have a big, long track record. I totally don't care. Like, I just want to know, are they decent? Are they smart? And do they lie? You know? Because, like, how many of you have been lied to by a salesman? Yeah? Everybody, right? So, that's what I think.
All right, I want to be respectful of your time. We actually went a few minutes over. Thank you all for participating.
You guys were
Thank
nice.
you to
Thank you
Chris
very
and
much.
Andy.
This
Yeah,
was good.
really appreciate it. Thank you guys for coming out.